I found tampons in my husband's car. I wished he had been unfaithful to me instead so that my kids wouldn't have had to go through this. I am a 29-year-old female who has been with my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. At first, I thought it was just some stray toy or snack wrapper, so I reached down to fish it out. As my fingers closed around the object, I felt the familiar cylindrical shape of a tampon. Confusion washed over me as I pulled it into view, the bright wrapper stark against the upholstery. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. It was a brand I'd never used, a small but glaring discrepancy that made my stomach churn. I brought it to my husband's attention later that evening, still holding the offending item like it was evidence in a mystery I was desperate to solve. He didn't seem to understand what it was at first, staring at the tampon in my hand with genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car between the cushions, and it's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year. Remember?" His face remained blank for a moment longer before a realization dawned. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his coworker, Fiona. His initial confusion quickly gave way to dismissiveness as he waved off my concerns with a nonchalant explanation. "Probably Fiona," he said with a shrug, turning back to his phone. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I stared at him, waiting for a sign that he understood why this was bothering me, but there was nothing, no apology, no concern, just a casual dismissal. It was as if the tampon was no big deal and I was overreacting. His felt like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling and questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his co-workers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband. The thought of my husband carpooling with Fiona and her husband had always been a non-issue. They were friends, after all, and it wasn't uncommon for them to share rides to lunch. In fact, we often socialized as couples, spending weekends at each other's houses for barbecues or movie nights. Fiona and I had even bonded over shared experiences, like the challenge of balancing work and family life. Our kids played together while we chatted about everything from the latest office gossip to more personal topics. It made sense, considering how often they carpooled. I reassured myself that the tampon could have easily slipped out of Fiona's purse during one of these outings. No big deal. Maybe it fell out when she was grabbing her phone or wallet, getting jostled around in the process. No big deal, right? It was just one of those little accidents that could happen to anyone. I brushed it off as a harmless mistake, convincing myself there was no need to worry. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid, built on years of trust and shared experiences. There was no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary, so I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small, easily explained incident cause unnecessary drama. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple of weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it. Whatsoever, maybe playing dumb. I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning. this time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair, and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's coworker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation, I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened: the tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons. Save for the backseat one I had already discarded, they were a match, just in different absorbency. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona either pranking my husband or pranking me, or both. Both direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there, watching my husband for any changed behavior. There was none. Our house for any misplaced foreign items. There were none. And even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, too, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, and at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the 3rd or 4th day, I was just happy to see a near-healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week, though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids were on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleepsuits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-no for efficient diaper changes. In my opinion, it's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them. So I was bewildered and kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there. But our older daughter was in the room, and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a 3rd time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now. After I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up, after nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating, or caring for my kids the way I should have been, and I wasn't getting any answers. So, I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the install, set up over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered, though, I got my long-awaited confirmation last week. The day began like any other weekday morning in our bustling household. My husband and I rushed around trying to corral our two energetic daughters into their school uniforms, all while attempting to grab a quick bite to eat ourselves. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air, as if we were all in this hectic dance together. Once the girls were dropped off at school, my husband and I went about our respective workdays, counting down the hours until we could reunite with our little ones. But there was a strange feeling that I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried, and it only intensified when I received a notification on my phone while at work, a ring notification. Motion at the front door. I clicked on the video clip, half expecting to see the usual delivery person or neighbor passing by, but what I saw left me stunned. There, on my doorstep, was a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The girls were supposed to be in daycare, and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Yet here she was, in our home with my husband and children. A wave of panic washed over me as I scrambled to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding, or was there something more sinister at play? I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that the answers to my questions might be far more troubling than I ever could have imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the blood pounding in my ears as I watched the unthinkable unfold before my eyes there on the footage. Captured by our Ring doorbell was a scene straight out of a nightmare. A woman I hadn't seen in years, leading my youngest daughter into our home, hand in hand, with my husband and older daughter trailing behind them. The shock of the moment rendered me momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were supposed to be at daycare and my husband at work, yet here they were, entering our house with a woman I never thought I'd see again, my sister-in-law. My initial reaction was one of sheer disbelief, a desperate hope that there must be some kind of mistake, some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. But, as the reality of the situation sank in, a wave of anger surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything in its path. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed my husband's number. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as the phone rang on the other end, there was no response. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the puck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him, even in his stupidity. He probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the Ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call, though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also registered as an individual with a history of abuse and a recovering addict who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had abused them. I hadn't seen her, heard from her, in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was, in our house with our children. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her after years of silence that left me reeling. It was the realization of what her presence in our home meant. My sister-in-law, fresh off another stint in rehab, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives, especially under such clandestine circumstances. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. It was about deception and betrayal at the deepest level. Suffice to say, I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all, and still somehow infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit and intrusion was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know, or worse, try to keep her family, our children, away from her, so they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage in my husband's car, so the Ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. The level of planning and secrecy involved made my skin crawl. She spent the night on a weekend. I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. The very thought of her in our home, in our bed, made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. The casual way he had lied to me, the ease with which he had kept this secret, made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls' clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised in his lie had dressed her and myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, a tiny clip in her hair, now felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. And yet, when I turned to my husband for reassurance, for a glimmer of hope in the face of uncertainty, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting to a series of harmless coincidences. My husband swore this was all in my head, the tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist, shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him, and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression, 2 years after I'd given birth, for years later. I told him that one of my biggest fears from motherhood was to suffer from PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. But as the weeks stretched into months, and the truth remained stubbornly elusive, my patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me whole. How could he dismiss my fears so callously, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, because he was my husband and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mind FK, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation and a lot of anger. My husband failed to explain himself when confronted. He stammered and stumbled over his words, offering half-hearted excuses that made no sense. He muttered something about trying to protect me from unnecessary stress, about his sister just wanting to make amends, but his words were disjointed and unconvincing. Each excuse was more implausible than the last, a desperate attempt to cover up the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted and built a life with was now a stranger to me, hiding behind a facade of lies and deceit. I watched as he avoided eye contact. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence that neither of us could ignore. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or for the deceit that tainted our marriage. Every time he opened his mouth, I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that he had been caught and there was no way out. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words ever could, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized the safety of our children. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life. With a heavy heart, I told him it was over. The look of shock and desperation on his face was almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage that had been done. I walked away, determined to protect my children from any further harm. I decided to end the relationship and file for divorce. The decision was both heartbreaking and empowering. It was devastating to acknowledge that our 7-year journey together had come to such a bitter end, but it was also liberating to take control of my life and prioritize my well-being and that of my children. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. There were countless court sessions, each more draining than the last, where I had to relive the pain and betrayal over and over again. My husband fought me every step of the way, refusing to accept responsibility for his actions and attempting to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made the process even more exhausting and emotionally taxing. In court, I detailed the discovery of the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law, and the lies my husband had told to cover his tracks. I showed the ring footage, which captured her entering our home with my children, and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law to corroborate my claims. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They required concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was not easy to obtain. Despite these challenges, I remained focused on the bigger picture. I emphasized my husband's deceit and the breach of trust, which were undeniable. The court recognized the complexity of the situation and the emotional turmoil it had caused. After months of legal battles and countless court sessions, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, with my husband receiving supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children, considering the deceit and the potential risks involved. Looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons that I hope others can learn from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future for us. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My parents defended my brother's $440,000 debt, tried to access my bank account, and called me selfish for saying no. Here's how I fought back. I've been lurking around here for a while, but until now, I never felt the need to write anything. I'm 35, and I need some perspective because my family has finally pushed me to the limit. Somehow, I'm always portrayed as the villain, regardless of what I do. Dealing with this prolonged family issue that appears to have no end in sight has truly worn me out, both mentally and emotionally. I have developed my career from the ground up and I am currently employed as a middle manager at a large Silicon Valley software company. I've worked hard and had many sleepless nights to earn all I own, including my house, car, and money. You wouldn't believe the terrible familial dynamics had to overcome to reach this point in my life. I'll give you some background on our family's history. Since I turned 18, I have been totally self-sufficient, and I mean it in every sense of the word financially, emotionally, and intellectually. The way my parents raised my brother and me was, to put it mildly, problematic at best, and they weren't exactly winning any parenting prizes. As a middle-class suburban family outside of Boston, we appeared to be the ideal American family. We lived in a good neighborhood with good schools. My mom taught elementary school part-time, and my dad worked in insurance. Beneath that idyllic exterior, though, there was an unwritten rule that influenced my entire upbringing. I was supposed to be the responsible one, the model, the one who always had to lead by example, while my younger brother, Jason, 27, could do no wrong. From a young age, the inequities were brutally apparent. One instance in particular comes to mind. When Jason was 8 years old and I was 16, my parents grounded me for a month after I received a plus on a single chemistry test. claiming I was wasting my potential. When Jason was caught robbing our dad's wallet for the third time that same month, they just said he was going through a phase. This was only one instance of the ongoing inequity in the way we were handled. It wasn't an isolated incident. Every time Jason made a mistake, and trust me, he made a lot of mistakes, it was ignored. He'll learn eventually, my mother would remark with that dismissive wave of her hand, or he's just sensitive, which was code for, let's pretend this never happened and hope he figures it out. In the meantime, it felt like the sky was dropping if I even stumbled. The pressure was relentless and debilitating. Why aren't you trying harder? You need to set a better example for your brother. Don't you know he looks up to you? I worked part-time at a local coffee shop, volunteered at the library, took all of my AP classes in high school, and tried to keep my GPA flawless because universities look for that kind of thing. Jason, on the other hand, rarely attended class and mostly stayed in the basement to play video games. Nevertheless, I somehow had to try harder. No matter what I accomplished, it was never sufficient. They would question why I didn't receive an A+ in calculus if I brought home straight A's, rather than praising me. My mother's first reaction after I was chosen valedictorian was, I hope this doesn't make your brother feel bad about his grades. This scenario continued into adulthood, with Jason struggling to pass his classes and everyone saying, at least you're doing your best, sweetie. Not everyone is cut out for academics. The bigger the stakes, the worse it got. If anything, Jason dropped out of community college after one semester because it was too stressful. My parents paid his rent for a gap year that ended up being 5 years of him finding himself. I worked two part-time jobs to pay for state college, one at a coffee shop in the mornings and another at a table waiting at night. I still recall the evening I moved away when I was 18. I was able to rent a small studio apartment with a roommate because of the money I saved from my part-time work. My dad said, well, you'll need to start paying rent if you're staying here anyway. When I told him I was leaving home, but they never asked Jason for a dollar when he was still living at home at the age of 25, because job hunting was emotionally draining for him. They even granted him an allowance. They never once offered to cover my living expenses or college tuition. Not that I expected them to, but it still hurt to see them go above and beyond for Jason while I was on my own. I worked several jobs, took out student debts, and ate more dinners of ramen noodles than I would want to recall. Jason, meanwhile, continued to live with them until he was in his mid-20s, jumping from one failing job to another while always coming up with an explanation that it wasn't his fault. He would say things like, the manager had it out for me, or the company's toxic culture wasn't a good fit for my personality. He never acknowledged his own responsibilities and always pointed the finger at something outside of himself. By covering up his filth and offering excuses, our parents encouraged this conduct at every opportunity. I worked two jobs while attending college, graduated with honors, and got an entry-level job at a software business. I worked my way up from there, putting in a lot of overtime and seizing any chance to get more education and certification. My parents never offered to help, and I never asked for it either. However, they had no trouble approaching me for financial assistance whenever Jason needed a little help to get back on his feet. Now, fast forward to last week. It was remarkable in and of itself that my mother called. You must realize that my mom doesn't call to talk. She never calls to say hello, check in, or inquire about my life. She calls when she's in need of things. I'm referring to the type of call that begins with excessively pleasant small talk, as if they're attempting to win you over before revealing the true reason for the call. That's precisely what took place last week. How's work? Are you still at that tech company? Have you been eating well? She asked at the beginning, which was so unusual that I knew something was up. My mother doesn't give a damn about my diet. The only thing she knows about my job is that I do something with computers. She couldn't even recall the name of my firm when we last spoke, which was during Thanksgiving 3 months earlier. even though I had been employed there for the previous 5 years. She seemed to be trying hard to sound casual, and the entire conversation felt forced. She inquired about my boyfriend. I've been single since my engagement ended last year, another narrative in which Jason played a not-so-insignificant role, and my apartment. I've owned a house for 2 years, even my cat, to which I have never given birth due to an allergy. Every question reminded me of how little she truly knows about my life and felt like a tiny paper cut. Jason was in trouble once more when she struck me with it. I wasn't shocked. Jason seems to get into problems all the time. However, I didn't anticipate this. He had apparently accrued $40, zero in debt, not the kind of debt that can be dismissed as young folly, such as credit card debt or student loan debt. No, he had borrowed from some very dubious individuals, and they were now sincerely demanding their money back. My mother's voice broke as if she were going to cry, which I'm sure she believed would get me to give in. It has worked numerous times. She wasted no time in heaping on the guilt. You've done so well for yourself. You've always been the strong one. Jason's not like you. He needs your help. He's sensitive. You know how he gets when he's under pressure. As I sat in my home office, trying to take in what she had just said, I looked out the window at the neighborhood that I had worked so hard to afford. $40,000. How could anyone possibly accumulate that much debt? My mom dismissed it like she was swatting away a bothersome fly when I asked her how it happened. Half anticipating some ludicrous explanation about a botched business endeavor or a scam he had fallen for, she said, "That doesn't matter right now," with the same contemptuous tone that always made my stomach turn. "What matters is that he's your brother. Family helps family. We've always taught you that. Family comes first." For years, they have used that line, "family helps family," as an excuse when they asked me to lend Jason money for his revolutionary cryptocurrency investment, which he lost all of in 2 weeks. That's what they stated. They said that after his girlfriend ejected him, he took my credit card information. They wanted me to let him stay at my house every time they required me to cover for Jason, fix anything for him, or clean up a mess he had made. They said that, and each time, I overcame my annoyance and followed their instructions. I did not want to be the villain, because deep down, there was still that little girl who longed for her parents' approval, thinking that perhaps this time they would recognize my assistance, my sacrifice, and my continual saving of their beloved boy. But $40,000. It wasn't merely a favor or a loan. It was a down payment for a home. That was a year of arduous labor that served as my safety net, emergency reserve, and security for the future. This time, I couldn't do it. I told her no for the first time in my life. Right up, I apologized, but I was powerless to save Jason from the disaster he had made. The tone of the conversation suddenly changed. In roughly 2 seconds, my mother moved from being pathetic to being enraged. Had it not been so horrifying, the metamorphosis would have been nearly remarkable. The mother's gentle, worried voice had vanished, to be replaced by an icy, piercing voice. She began to scream, "You're being selfish," her voice getting louder as she spoke. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. You're abandoning your family when they need you most." The nuclear option was even mentioned by her. "Do you want his blood on your hands? He borrowed from some nasty folks. What would happen if he did?" The manipulation was so obvious that it was quite comical, nearly. However, her attempt to hold me accountable for Jason's bad decisions again was not amusing, as though his choices, errors, and total lack of accountability were somehow my fault. Then I ended the call. I was no longer able to listen to it. My chest felt constricted, as if someone were sitting on it, and my hands were shaking so much that I could hardly press the end call button. However, behind the familiar burden of familial expectations, the shame, and the fear, there was comfort. I was relieved that I had maintained my position. For once, I've put in too much effort to be brought down by the poor decisions of others. I've devoted years to developing my job, becoming self-sufficient, and establishing a life apart from serving as Jason's safety net. I simply couldn't bear the idea of discarding all of that, of maybe jeopardizing my own financial stability to allow his recklessness to continue. However, the problem with growing up in a dysfunctional home is that guilt creeps in almost instantly. Even if you know you're making the right decision and are positive you're acting in your own best interests. Even though I know I'm not the bad guy, my family has a way of changing the facts, making me doubt my own judgment, and making me feel that way, and it was the same this time. I can't get rid of the thought that perhaps I made the wrong choice, even though I said no, and no, it was the right one at the moment. Confronting my family seemed like the correct thing to do, but now I'm left wondering if I've made things worse. But what if they're correct? Could I be being self-centered? What if Jason does suffer as a result of my refusal to assist? The logical side of my brain understands that I have no responsibility for my brother's decisions or the results of those decisions. However, a part of me that is still that young child begging for her parents' approval continues asking herself, what if? To be honest, I have no idea what will happen next. That call was only the beginning. I was totally unprepared for what transpired next. I suspect that this is not the end, particularly with Jason. My parents have never been good at taking no for an answer. I'm trying to remain strong, though. I'm trying to keep in mind that I have the right to defend my future and myself as the situation develops. I suspect I'll require additional guidance. I'll provide an update shortly. First update. First of all, I want to thank everyone who left encouraging comments on my previous post. To be honest, I didn't anticipate such a strong reaction. The previous week has seen a sharp increase in tension, and not in a positive way. Do you recall that I sensed this wasn't the end? Yes, I was correct. As soon as I hung up on my mom, the harassment campaign began. Initially, it was just a flurry of text messages, the typical guilt-tripping fare. Then, however, things became considerably more sinister. My bank notified me of the unusual behavior last Tuesday. Someone had tried to use what seemed to be stolen personal information to get into my account. I received a direct call from the bank's fraud department. They claimed that a huge transfer attempt using my credentials had been detected by their security system due to the suspicious IP address. The fraud investigator told me that the person who attempted to access my account had my mother's maiden name, my social security number, and even the name of my first pet, all of which are standard security questions. Jason would be the only one with access to all that information. Upon realizing that my own brother would attempt to steal from me, I promptly updated all of my security questions and passwords. Very difficult. Money was no longer the only factor in this. This was a completely new kind of betrayal. This is where it becomes even more bizarre, though. One of the few relatives with whom I truly get along, my Aunt Catherine, gave me a call yesterday. It seems that my parents have been giving a totally different account of what happened to everyone in the family. They have portrayed me as some cold-blooded monster who is living in luxury while her brother suffers, and they claim that I am hoarding my fortune while poor Jason is fighting for his life. My aunt called to hear my side of the tale, happily not believing it. God bless sensible family. She was startled when I told her about the attempted bank fraud. She also disclosed information that I was unaware of. It seems that Jason had attempted to borrow money from multiple family members in recent months, each time claiming a different reason for his need. He told a wide range of stories. He told our old grandma that he needed money to pay his medical fees. It was for a sure-thing investment opportunity. According to our cousin Mark, it was to launch a modest business. According to our Uncle Steve, he informed our parents that he owed money to dangerous people, but none of these allegations fit. But this morning was the real kicker. My dad sent me an email, which was the first time he had spoken to me directly since this whole situation began. It was icy, cunning, and to be honest, a little menacing. This is a portion of his writing. Your actions are forcing us to reconsider your position in this family. Your mother and I have always provided for you, supported your education, and given you every opportunity to succeed. Your current success is a direct result of our sacrifices. If you continue to abandon your brother in his time of need, there will be consequences. Think carefully about your next move. The part about them funding my education made me laugh. My student loan payments are still ongoing. However, the warning was unmistakable. Assist Jason, or risk being cut off from the family. They believe they can control me by threatening to isolate me, so they are attempting to use family ties as leverage. They don't seem to realize that I've been essentially cut off from them for years. We have always had a conditional relationship. I have to take care of Jason, I have to play the part they put me in, and I have to accept their perverted definition of family devotion. I have discussed the attempted account hack with the IT security team at my firm. They are assisting me with protecting all of my gadgets and accounts connected to my job. Additionally, I've begun recording every single text, email, and voicemail. Even if I find it hard to believe, I must gather proof against my own family. The most bizarre aspect of it all, Jason's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, depending on their present situation, sent me an SMS. Jason has been acting strangely recently. She told me, we've never been close, but she was worried enough to contact me after hearing him make cryptic remarks about getting his and teaching people lessons. This weekend, I'm going to install security cameras at my house. I may be too cautious, but I'm not taking any chances in the wake of the bank account disaster. I never imagined that I would need to defend myself against my own family, but I suppose that's where we are at the moment. $40,000 is only the beginning. For those who are wondering why I don't just pay the money to make this all go away, even if I wanted to, which I don't. According to my aunt's disclosures of Jason's previous borrowing attempts, his overall debt is likely substantially larger. Helping my brother is no longer the goal of this. It's about supporting a detrimental behavior pattern that must end. Next week, I have an appointment with a financial advisor to go over all of my accounts and implement additional security measures in order to understand my alternatives in the event that the situation worsens. I'm also thinking of talking to a lawyer about the attempted fraud, not necessarily to file charges, but if something important occurs, which is likely to happen shortly given the current state of affairs. I'll provide another update. I appreciate you letting me vent, and I want to thank everyone who commented on my previous post and shared similar experiences. Knowing that I'm not the only one coping with this type of dysfunction in my family is comforting. Second update. I made the decision to speak with Jason face-to-face following the attempted bank fraud I detailed in my previous update. The events that followed were startling and yet completely expected. Jason's residence was my destination yesterday evening. It's a dilapidated establishment in a dubious area of the city. He was unshaven, had heavy circles under his eyes, and was wearing a tattered t-shirt. When he eventually opened the door, his initial remarks, "You were patient enough to arrive. My attempt to hack my bank account is not an apology. No justification for the debt of $40,000. As usual, just entitlement." He gave me a disturbing response when I questioned him about the bank fraud. Mom and Dad said that if things became severe enough, you would give in. I was merely expediting the procedure. He said it so nonchalantly, as if he were talking about the weather instead of confessing to a murder. At that point, I became aware of something troubling about his flat. There were several phones and what seemed to be credit card statements with several names on them on his coffee table. He swept them into a drawer before I could get a better look. When I understood that this might be more than simply my bank account, my stomach fell. My parents arrived just as I was ready to depart. When I got there, Jason had apparently texted them. They stormed inside his residence as if it were their own. Naturally, Mom was crying and Dad was enraged. This led to the most heated family argument we've ever experienced. Dad began by expressing their disappointment with my self-centered actions. Mom said that they had failed as parents because I had shown myself to be so heartless. The worst part is that they really defended the bank fraud attempt. When I brought it up, Mom said, "He was desperate. When you declined to assist, what option did he have?" People sometimes make mistakes when they're backed into a corner. Dad continued. What I was hearing was unbelievable. So, if it involved family, is identity theft acceptable? I inquired. How did they react? No matter what, family helps family. I lost it at that point. Years of repressed annoyance were released. I explained to them how their favoritism had impacted me and how Jason became the person he is today as a result of their enabling. I cited concrete examples, such as their refusal to assist me with my college tuition while paying for Jason's unsuccessful attempts, their repeated attempts to coerce me into giving him money, and their persistent manipulation of my emotions. What did Jason say? At least I'm not a stuck-up bitch who thinks she's better than everyone else. He grinned. In fact, Mom gave a nod of approval. I came to the important realization that they would not change at that point. Never. Money was no longer the only factor in this. This concerned a family relationship that was essentially poisonous and would never get better. I pulled out my phone and listened to the full recording of our chat. How did they look when they saw that I had proof that they were supporting bank fraud? This recording goes straight to the police if anything happens to my accounts again, I declared, and I will file charges this time. Jason. Mom began to complain that I was endangering them. My father referred to me as manipulating. For the first time, Jason appeared concerned as he stood there. Dad took hold of my arm as I was about to depart and said something I will never forget. Never expect to be welcomed in this family again if you walk out that door. I gave him a direct look and said, "That sounds more like a promise than a threat," before leaving. I had dozens of missed calls and messages when I came home. I blocked their phone numbers. I then opened my laptop and began sending an email to my entire extended family, including screenshots of threatening messages, a transcript of the tape discussion, and documentation of the bank fraud attempt. I will no longer serve as the family scapegoat. I'm tired of being controlled. I will no longer serve as Jason's personal ATM. Above all, I have finished maintaining their secrets. It's likely that this will be my final update. I have a hunch that everyone's situation is going to drastically change soon. I'm concentrating on defending myself right now, which includes researching security systems and speaking with a lawyer about possible restraining orders. Thank you to everyone who has been keeping an eye on this situation and lending support. Your remarks gave me the courage to advocate for myself today. Third update. Everything has changed since my last update, which was a month ago. I made the decision to no longer preserve the family's secrets. After the altercation at Jason's place, when I eventually revealed the truth, this is what transpired. Do you recall the email I said I was sending to the extended family? Well, I made the decision to take things a step further. I made a thorough social media post with screenshots of the attempted bank fraud, Jason's own admissions of guilt, and a recording of my parents justifying his behavior as proof. I only wanted the truth to be known. I wasn't attempting to get revenge. The reaction was tremendous. Other victims of Jason's schemes began to come forward within a few hours. According to my cousin Tim, Jason had taken out a $5,000 loan for an unfulfilled business venture. Aunt Beth said that he had persuaded her to co-sign a loan, which she is currently repaying. Even the mystery surrounding my grandmother's missing jewels from last Christmas had a likely suspect, all of a sudden. However, Jason's ex-roommate made the most important disclosure when he revealed how Jason had used his identity to open many credit cards, being too ashamed to come forward. He believed that no one would take him seriously because of my parents' perfect son. Someone in at the business where Jason had just had an interview saw the social media post. His past involvement with financial fraud piqued their curiosity. It goes without saying that he was not hired. My parents' standing in their social group suffered greatly. They had supported their struggling son for years while presenting themselves as the ideal parents handling one ungrateful daughter. Everyone was aware of the reality now. After complaining to their church mates about my selfishness, they began to distance themselves from me. All of a sudden, Dad's golf friends were too busy to play every week. Mom attempted to minimize the harm by accusing me of lying, but the facts were clear. They were unable to justify their own recorded comments, the text messages, or the bank records. Their carefully constructed image fell apart when Jason's current roommate viewed the post. It was the real game changer. When he consented to share his apartment, he was unaware of Jason's past. Jason received an eviction notice within a week. People don't want to live with someone who tries to commit bank fraud. It turns out, according to what I've been told, Jason works 3 jobs to pay off his debt. He is finally being held accountable for his acts, and his credit has been damaged. Surprisingly, my parents have stopped using social media. No more quotes about ungrateful kids or passive-aggressive posts about family values. Everyday life has never been better for me. That job promotion I applied for, I understand. I've been able to concentrate on my professional and personal development without the continual drain of family turmoil and money exploitation. What a concept. I'm finally meeting someone who respects and understands boundaries. Mom and Dad no longer discuss me at all, according to the few family members I still communicate with. They've put an end to guilt tripping. No more attempts at manipulation. At last, they've realized that sometimes social accountability is the result of acts having repercussions. To everyone who has to deal with toxic family members, sometimes letting the truth speak for itself is more effective than going to court. The wrong people will come out, and the right people will listen. Legal repercussions were not my family's biggest fear. Rather, it was the public discovering who they really were. By speaking up instead of keeping quiet, I not only freed myself from their control, but also gave others the confidence to defend themselves. We appreciate everyone who has supported and followed this adventure. I feel really free for the first time in my life. It's acceptable when the family you were born into isn't the one you need. Now I'm assembling my own network of people that respect integrity, accountability, and sincere concern for others. My last update will be this one. Now that the story is over, I'm prepared to begin a new chapter, free from guilt, deception, and the never-ending weight of providing for others. And what do you know? No lawsuit ever could make that feel better. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.